You're not part of this family anymore. Don't come back. That's the text message I got from my brother, Austin, after a 5-day trip to find peace. When I got home, they had changed all the locks and decided to kick me out of the house where I'd lived for 24 years. The most painful part was that they did this less than a month after Grandpa, the only person who truly loved me, passed away. But 2 days later, I got a call from Grandpa's lawyer. And that's when everything changed completely. Join me as I tell you why my family kicked me out and how I got through it. Hello, everyone. My name is Brian Miller. I'm 24 years old and a logistics coordinator, making $55,000 yearly in Phoenix, Arizona. 3 months ago, I was kicked out of the house where I'd lived for 24 years. That day was a Sunday morning in early March. I had just returned home from a 5-day emotional healing trip to Sedona, a small town about a 3-hour drive from Phoenix, known for its majestic red rocks and peaceful atmosphere. After my grandpa's sudden death 4 months earlier, I was completely off balance. My grandpa, Harold Miller, wasn't just my grandfather. He was the only person in my family who truly understood and loved me. When he passed away from a sudden heart attack, I felt like I'd lost my best friend. I decided to travel alone for 5 days to find peace. I needed time to process the pain of losing my grandpa so suddenly. I spent time meditating, hiking, and reflecting on life throughout the trip. At that time, I thought I had found some much-needed peace to move forward. But I had no idea that while I was seeking tranquility in Sedona, my family was planning to erase me from their lives. After 5 days of traveling in Sedona, my spirits had noticeably improved. Mornings watching the sunrise over Red Rock, afternoons hiking Cathedral Rock Trail, and especially the quiet time for reflection, all helped me feel much more at ease. Around 9 a.m. on Sunday, I arrived home. My grandpa had let my parents live in this house since they married almost 30 years ago. The house, with 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and a small backyard, was where my brother Austin and I grew up, holding countless childhood memories. As we reached adulthood, when we planned to rent our places, Grandpa told us, "Just stay in that house, don't waste money on rent. It still belongs to me, and I want the family to be close." So our family of 4, my dad Raymond, my mom Laura, Austin, and I, continued to live together in this house, and living expenses like utilities, internet, and food were split evenly for many years. Despite occasional disagreements about chores or shared spaces, we still lived harmoniously. After parking in front of the house, I quickly grabbed my travel bag from the trunk, eager to rush inside and share my exciting trip with my family. But when I approached the front door and put my key in the lock, it wouldn't turn. First, I thought I had used the wrong key. I took it out to check again. It was the familiar brass-colored front door key. I tried again, but still couldn't open it. Immediately, my heart started pounding faster. My hand trembled as I realized the lock was completely different. It was brand new, shiny, and unfamiliar. I quickly ran around the house to check the back door, but the lock there had also been replaced. I tried pushing on the windows, but they were all securely locked from the inside. When I returned to the front of the house, I noticed Austin's red Ford wasn't in the garage. Only Dad's old Toyota Camry remained. Perhaps they had gone somewhere together. Standing at the door with my suitcase, I felt like a stranger trying to break into someone else's home. A sense of unease filled my chest. My family knew today was the day I was returning, yet no one had informed me they had changed the locks. Right after that, I called my parents to ask what was happening. Maybe they'd changed the locks for security reasons and forgot to tell me. I called Dad first. The phone rang and rang, but no one picked up. Then I tried Mom, same result. Both calls went straight to voicemail. Even though I was starting to feel uneasy, I wanted to reassure myself. Maybe they're just busy with something important. After about 5 calls to my parents, I called my brother Austin. His phone rang continuously, too, and he had no answer. After 3 more calls, I put the phone down, slumping onto the house's front steps, feeling confused and worried. 5 minutes later, my phone beeped, signaling a new message. I opened it and felt like I'd been struck by lightning when I read the text from Austin. "You're not part of this family anymore. Don't come back." I sat still as a stone for a moment, staring at the phone screen. Was Austin joking with me? Or did someone borrow his phone to send a malicious message? Immediately, I called Austin's number again to demand an explanation. But the phone kept ringing busy. It was clear I'd been blocked. The shock turned into confusion, then gradually into ultimate pain. 2 minutes later, my phone beeped again. This time it was a notification from the family group chat. which we'd used to discuss family matters for years. The notification displayed, "Brian Miller has been removed from the group." At this point, my heart felt like it would burst from my chest. My hands trembled as I realized this was no misunderstanding or joke. They had planned to cut me out of the family. I tried to contact my parents again, hoping they would explain everything. But still, no one picked up. Sitting on the steps of the house where I'd lived for 24 years, dry leaves blew across the front yard, and the wind bit cold through my thin t-shirt. But I was determined not to leave. Austin had no right to kick me out of this house. I would wait until my parents came home and demand that they explain this situation directly. Around 11 a.m., Austin's car turned into the driveway. I stood up from the steps, my heart pounding as the three family members exited the car. I first noticed their cold, distant expressions when they saw me. There was no surprise, no hint of guilt or confusion. They knew I'd be there and were prepared for this confrontation. As they approached the front door, I asked them, "Why did you change the locks without telling me anything?" Austin stopped, looked me in the eye, and asked, "You're still here? I thought after the text I sent, you'd understand everything." As soon as Austin finished speaking, I replied, "You have no right to kick me out. This house belongs to Grandpa." Immediately after, Dad stopped, looked at me with icy eyes, and told me in a decisive tone, "We've decided. This house belongs to Austin." Hearing Dad's announcement, my heart felt squeezed. This man had raised me for 24 years, the man I called Dad. But now he spoke to me as if I were just a stranger begging to stay. Mom stood beside him, her gaze avoiding direct eye contact with me. Her voice trembling but still trying to maintain a firm facade as she told me, "You need to be independent now, Brian. You're 24, you can't depend on family forever." Each of Mom's words felt like a knife stabbing into my heart. The woman who once held me when I was sick, who cooked my favorite meals, was now treating me as if I were a burden the family needed to get rid of. Feeling suffocated and desperate, I threatened them, "I'll call the police. You can't just kick me out of the house like this." Hearing me mention the police, Austin spoke up in a cold voice I had never heard him use before with me. "The police won't help. Grandpa's gone, the house belongs to Mom and Dad now, and they have the right to ask you to leave within 30 days. You can stay another 30 days if you want, but you'll still have to move out after that." Austin's words were entirely accurate then. His words reminded me that if Grandpa were still alive, they would never dare to do something like this. At that moment, standing among the three people dearest to me in my life, I felt more alone than ever. The air around me felt thick, every breath becoming difficult. And I realized the painful truth that I no longer had a place in this family. They had decided to cut me out of their lives, and nothing I said or did could change that decision. Faced with their cruel decision, I didn't beg to stay. I didn't even call the police, though I'd threatened to, because I knew they couldn't help me anyway. More importantly, even if the law allowed me to stay for 30 days, those 30 days would be pure hell. No one would look at each other. Worse, they might do things I didn't want to imagine. Summoning what little courage I had left, I told them calmly, "Give me 3 hours to pack my things, then I'll leave." After a few seconds of silent glances, they nodded their agreement without another word. Walking into the house I'd called home for 24 years, I felt like a stranger invading someone else's private space. Everything was still the same. The familiar brown sofa, the wooden dining table where the family once gathered, the photos hanging on the walls, but the cold atmosphere made it feel strangely alien. I went straight to my room and started packing. Every item I picked up held dear memories. The book To Kill a Mockingbird that Grandpa gave me when I was 16, family photos from my childhood when we were still happy, the old laptop I'd saved up to buy. Throughout the packing process, no one in my family came to help or talk to me. Austin even stood guard at my bedroom door, as if he feared I'd steal something that didn't belong to me. His suspicious gaze made me feel humiliated. Whenever I put an item in my suitcase, I felt like I was erasing a trace of myself from this house. The room gradually became empty, as if I had never existed here. After exactly 3 hours, I dragged my 2 suitcases downstairs. No one in the family said goodbye or showed any regret. They just stood silently, watching me like a tenant leaving their property. Before stepping out the door, I turned back to look at the 3 of them, my voice cold but clear as I told them, "Remember this day. From now on, I'm done with all of you. We have no relationship anymore." No one replied after my words. I pulled my 2 suitcases, walked out the front door, and heard the lock click shut behind me. Just like that, I officially became homeless in the very city I was born and raised in. I wandered through Phoenix in my old Honda Civic that afternoon, not knowing where to go. The familiar streets suddenly felt strange, as if I were lost in a new city. Finally, as if guided by some force, I found myself at Greenwood Cemetery, where my grandpa rests. I parked near the entrance and walked to the familiar grave. The gray granite headstone, etched with Harold Miller, 1942 to 2025, stood there, a testament to the passing of the only person who truly understood me. Standing before his grave, I started telling him everything that had happened. I recounted my trip to Sedona to find peace, about coming home, and finding the locks changed. I told him about my parents' cruelty, about what happened that morning. In that cold cemetery, I was standing there, talking to myself with no one to reply. Occasionally, gentle breezes swept through the old oak trees in the cemetery, creating a soft rustling sound. Then, unexpectedly, a small robin flew from somewhere, circling me as if it understood my pain. I held out my hand, and a strange thing happened. The bird gently landed on my palm. Now and then, it pecked lightly at my palm, as if comforting me. Looking at the bird's friendliness, I felt like Grandpa was listening to me. But an absolute sense of loneliness overwhelmed me when the bird flew away. I wished he could come back to life, listen to me, and give me advice, but the reality left me desperate. As I was still standing before Grandpa's grave, a voice from behind startled me. "Brian, you're here too?" I turned to see Uncle Thomas, my dad's younger brother, who also lived in Phoenix. He was 47, a civil engineer, with a kind demeanor and always warm towards me at family gatherings. Seeing my expression, Uncle Thomas asked with concern, "Are you here to visit Grandpa because you miss him too?" After a few seconds of hesitation, I replied, trembling, "Partly because I miss him, partly because I have nowhere else to go." Looking at my dazed eyes and sad face, Uncle Thomas immediately knew something was wrong. Without waiting for me to say more, he sat down on the steps before Grandpa's grave and told me, "Sit down and tell me everything." Right after that, I told him what had happened that morning. I recounted my trip to Sedona, returning home to find the locks changed, Austin's cruel text, the cold confrontation with my parents, and the 3 hours I spent packing amidst hostile silence. As I recounted everything, Uncle Thomas listened silently, his face growing paler as I finished the story. Finally, he was shocked by how my parents and brother had treated me. His face filled with anger, he told me, "Raymond can't do that. I'm going there to talk to your dad right now." At his concern, I felt profoundly grateful. I immediately nodded my thanks. A few seconds later, he suggested, "Come stay at my place tonight. Don't wander around anymore." But I politely refused, telling him, "Thank you, Uncle, but I'll get a hotel near work for now. It'll be convenient to get to my job. I don't want to complicate the situation further." Hearing my decision, Uncle Thomas didn't try to persuade me further. He nodded in understanding. "Okay, but if you need anything, call me right away." Then he stood up, his eyes determined, and said, "Now I'm going to Raymond's house to sort this out. I'll contact you later." After that, Uncle Thomas left. Watching Uncle Thomas's figure disappear into the late afternoon sunlight of the cemetery, a gentle warmth seeped into my heart. After many hours of feeling abandoned by the world, I finally knew I wasn't completely alone. After he left, I returned to Grandpa's grave one last time, gently touched the cold granite headstone, and whispered, "Don't worry, Grandpa. I'll be back to visit you soon." Then I got into my car and drove towards my company. I needed to find a nearby hotel to rest and think about what to do next. An hour later, I rented a temporary room at a hotel near my logistics company. The room was small, with a single bed, a desk, and an old TV, but at least I had a place to rest. My phone rang as soon as I got into the room and set my 2 suitcases down. It was Uncle Thomas. The moment I answered, I could feel the anger in his voice. I sat down and listened as he recounted the argument that had just taken place. Uncle Thomas had gone to the house and demanded that my parents explain why they treated me this way. But my parents not only refused to listen, they reacted harshly. Uncle Thomas told me that my dad said it was his family's business and that Uncle shouldn't interfere. My mom said Austin needed the house more because he was about to start a family. What made Uncle Thomas most furious was their attitude. They showed absolutely no remorse for kicking me out. Even when Uncle told them they were wrong, they threatened to call the police if he didn't leave immediately. Ultimately, Uncle Thomas was forced to leave, but not without giving them a stern warning. He told them that what they did would have consequences. Someday they would regret today's decision. When he finished telling me, I felt both sad and grateful. Sad because I realized my parents were determined to cut ties with me, without hesitation about changing their minds. But I was also very grateful to Uncle Thomas. Although the outcome of the conversation wasn't what we hoped for, the fact that he stood up for me made me feel less alone. Before ending the call, I told him, "Thank you so much for standing up for me. No matter the outcome, I'm grateful because you value me." Hearing me, Uncle Thomas sighed and replied, "Don't you worry. I'm always here if you need me." After the call, I lay on the hotel bed, looked up at the ceiling, and wondered what I would do next. That night, lying in the small, dimly lit hotel room, I couldn't sleep. My mind drifted back to Grandpa, the man who had been the only light in my life. I remembered weekend afternoons when Grandpa taught me to fix electrical things in the garage. His calloused hands always patiently guided me on holding a screwdriver and checking a circuit. He told me that being self-reliant would ensure I'd never depend on anyone. I remembered weekend mornings, Grandpa making pancakes for me when I visited. He always asked about my studies and future dreams and never compared me to Austin like Mom and Dad often did. Then I remembered the day I got the news of his passing almost a month ago. I was working at the logistics office when I got the call from Mom. Her voice trembled as she told me Grandpa had died from a sudden heart attack. Even though he was rushed to the hospital, he didn't make it. The feeling then was like someone had just pulled the ground from under my feet. At his funeral, I was the one who cried the most. Austin and my parents were sad, but they didn't show the deep sorrow I felt. Perhaps it was because they had never been as close to him as I was. Now, lying in this unfamiliar room, I realized that after my trip to Sedona, I only felt a little more peaceful, but my longing for him had never faded. He lived on in my heart through every life lesson he had taught. His words echoed in my mind. "Brian, life will be tough sometimes, but never let anyone hurt your self-respect. You have to be strong and confident in yourself." At that moment, I understood that Grandpa had prepared me with the lessons I needed to face today. Even though he was no longer with me, his love and teachings would help me get through this challenging period. In the darkness, I silently promised Grandpa I would live faithfully to what he had taught me. The next day, I went to work as usual, as if nothing had happened. During my lunch break and in the evening after work, I took the opportunity to check out some rental homes around the Phoenix area. I wanted to find a place that fit my salary, a place I could truly call home after everything that had happened. By the second day's afternoon, a phone call changed my life forever. I had just finished a meeting with the logistics team that day when an unfamiliar number appeared on my screen. It had a Phoenix area code, but I didn't recognize it. After a few seconds of hesitation, I decided to answer. The voice on the other end of the line was polite and professional. "Hello, Brian Miller. I'm Attorney Grayson, Mr. Harold Miller's lawyer." My heart started beating faster when I heard Grandpa's name. The lawyer continued, "Please be present at my office tomorrow at 9 a.m. to hear about your grandfather's will." After the lawyer's announcement, I thanked him and promised to be there on time. After hanging up, hundreds of thoughts started flooding my mind. When did Grandpa make a will? I had never heard anyone in the family mention this. Why was the lawyer calling me specifically? How was I involved in Grandpa's will? About 5 minutes later, I called Uncle Thomas to ask about it. He confirmed that he also received a notification from the lawyer that he would be present tomorrow at 9 a.m., and he was also surprised, proving that he had no prior knowledge of Grandpa making a will. Before ending the call, Uncle advised me, "You should go and see what Grandpa's will says. He might have left something for you." That evening, lying in the hotel room, I braced myself for the possibility of seeing my parents and Austin at the lawyer's office tomorrow morning. The feeling of unease and anxiety made it hard for me to sleep. I wondered how tomorrow's meeting would go and whether this might be the last chance for our family to reconcile. But deep down, I felt that tomorrow would be a day that changed everything. At exactly 8:50 a.m. the next morning, I entered Attorney Grayson's office at the address he had provided via email. The office building was in downtown Phoenix, with modern architecture and a professional atmosphere. I saw Uncle Thomas's family sitting in the corner as I entered the waiting room. Standing beside them were my parents and my brother Austin. But I wasn't surprised, because I was sure they would be here for anything related to Grandpa's assets. Austin stood up when he saw me, looking annoyed, and roared, "What are you doing here? Did Grandpa leave you something?" I didn't respond to him. Instead, I looked towards Dad, trying to keep my voice even and polite as I asked him, "Are you doing well?" They didn't reply. Dad avoided my gaze, and Mom silently looked down at the floor. Their coldness made the atmosphere in the room even more tense. At precisely 9 a.m., Attorney Grayson, a man in his 50s with slightly graying hair and a sharp suit, invited all of us into the conference room. He began to open the documents with a solemn expression. According to Attorney Grayson, this will was made by my grandpa on March 18, 2022, in full mental clarity, without any coercion or undue influence. After announcing the date the will was made, the lawyer began to read its contents. The first part was for Uncle Thomas's family. In the will, Uncle Thomas inherited his family's house and $400,000 from Grandpa's savings. Uncle Thomas listened silently, nodding slightly as if they had known this beforehand. After Uncle Thomas's part came the section for my family. Attorney Grayson looked at me and announced, "The current house where Raymond Miller, Linda Miller, and Austin Miller live is bequeathed by Harold Miller to Brian Miller." After that announcement, the room fell into absolute silence. I could hear my own heart pounding. A few seconds later, the lawyer continued, "Furthermore, Brian Miller inherits an additional $100,000 in cash from Harold Miller's private savings account." Then he spoke the last sentence that stunned my entire family. "Raymond Miller, Linda Miller, and Austin Miller do not inherit any other assets from this will." Immediately, my dad yelled in an angry voice, "No way, this is unfair. I'm his son. Why don't I get anything?" Right after that, Mom asked, trembling, "Why, Brian? He's his grandson. Why does he get a share while we, his children, get nothing?" But Austin was the most furious. He shot up from his seat, slammed his hand on the table, and shouted, "This is a mistake." Then he turned to me, pointed directly at my face, and demanded loudly, "Did you manipulate Grandpa into making a will to inherit the house?" I sat silently at his question, still reeling from what I had just heard. I never thought Grandpa would leave me such significant things. Uncle Thomas and his wife remained silent, showing no surprise at the will's contents. It seemed they had known about Grandpa's decision beforehand. A moment later, Uncle Thomas looked directly at my dad and said in a cold voice, "This is the price for kicking your son out of the house, turning him homeless." Uncle's words were like a direct slap to my parents' faces. They suddenly fell silent, realizing I was the house's valid owner. In that moment, I understood that everything had changed entirely. This turning point not only reversed the power dynamic in the family, but also showed me that Grandpa had understood everyone's nature a long time ago. About 10 minutes later, once the atmosphere in the room had settled and everyone had composed themselves, Attorney Grayson continued with the next part of the will. He took out a still-sealed letter in a yellow envelope with Grandpa's familiar handwriting. The lawyer explained, "This letter was written by Mr. Harold after the will was made, to clarify the reasons behind his decisions." The lawyer opened the envelope and began to read the letter's contents. In the letter, Grandpa made it clear to the family that he was not unfair to anyone and had valid reasons for this decision. Grandpa mentioned in the letter that Austin had lost $400,000 gambling at Desert Diamond Casino 4 years prior. Loan sharks threatened him, and my family came to Grandpa, begging for his help. That day, Dad, Mom, and Austin knelt in Grandpa's living room, crying and pleading for him to save Austin's life. Grandpa gave them $400,000 at that time to save Austin's life. When the lawyer read this part, the room fell into absolute silence. I was utterly shocked. I had never known about this. Now I understand why Grandpa loved and trusted me so much. In the letter, Grandpa also wrote that he knew my mom and dad always favored Austin over me. If he hadn't made the will this way, sooner or later, they would have sold the house and given all the money to Austin for him to continue gambling. Hearing this, Uncle Thomas was utterly shocked. He looked at my dad with disbelief and said, "You're so greedy. Dad already gave you $400,000, and you still want more?" As the truth was revealed, my dad sat in silence, his face pale, unable to argue. Austin hung his head, not daring to look at anyone. My mom burst into tears, realizing all the truth had been exposed. At that moment, I truly understood Grandpa's deep love and wisdom. He had seen the future and protected me from those he knew would take advantage of me. After all that, my parents and Austin looked at me with fear. They looked at me that way for the first time ever, no longer with contempt or coldness, but with anxiety and unease about the new power I just gained. After my parents, Austin, and Uncle Thomas's family left, I stayed behind at Attorney Grayson's office. I needed time to process all the information I just received and thoroughly understand my legal rights. I told him what happened over the past 2 days. From being kicked out of the house, Austin's cruel text, to sleeping in a hotel. After I finished, Attorney Grayson looked at me with astonishment. He couldn't believe my parents and brother could be so cruel. Under Attorney Grayson's advice, I drafted an official notice requesting them to vacate the house within 30 days. The lawyer explained that this was my legal right as the new house owner. That afternoon, I took the rest of the day off work, grabbed my luggage from the hotel, and took the notarized copy of the will. I drove back to the house. When I parked in front, I felt a strange sensation. This was still the familiar house where I'd grown up, but now I was returning as its owner. Entering the house as its legal owner, I felt a complete shift in how I perceived the space. The 3 members of my family were sitting in the living room, their faces etched with worry and unease. Immediately after, I took out the notice I had prepared and read it aloud to them. Based on the legally notarized will, I require you to vacate this house within 30 days from today. Furthermore, you must surrender all keys to the house. Immediately, my mom burst into tears and begged me, "Brian, don't kick your parents out. We're family." My dad also pleaded, "Son, I know I was wrong. I apologize for what happened." But I remained firm, looking them straight and saying, "3 days ago, what did you tell me? Remember that yourself." After my reply, Austin, silent until then, suddenly spoke pleadingly, "Brian, I'll leave as you requested. But can you lend me $100,000? Hearing that amount, I was stunned. I looked at him in surprise and asked, "What for?" After that question, Austin lowered his head, his voice trembling as he admitted, "I have a bit of a problem. A few days ago, I lost at the casino again. I borrowed $70,000 there. With interest, it's almost $100,000 now." Knowing he had gambled again, I flat out refused. I said, "You've run out of chances. Grandpa saved you once with $400,000. I won't repeat that mistake." The moment I refused, Austin suddenly became enraged. He stood up, pointed straight at my face, and yelled, "You're selfish, heartless." Not letting him say more, I immediately retorted, "Don't forget, 3 days ago, you were the one who kicked me out of the house with Mom and Dad." After that, I turned my back and went up to my room. But Austin didn't give up. That evening, he posted on the Reddit Stories family drama group, along with a photo of the 30-day notice I had given them. The post read, "My ungrateful brother Brian Miller is kicking our parents out of the house because he inherited property. After inheriting the house from Grandpa, he immediately forgot his family and is ungrateful to those who raised him since childhood. Look, this is the notice he gave our family." Austin's post quickly went viral on social media in Phoenix. He also shared it in local groups, making the story a sensation in the community. Hundreds of comments are split into 2 distinct factions. The side supporting Austin commented, "Family is most important. You can't kick your parents out for money. This brother is truly ungrateful. Inherited a little bit and forgot the people who raised him." But many people understood and supported me. "There must be a good reason. Don't judge without knowing the truth. Maybe his family mistreated him." Within 24 hours, my name became the target of criticism on Phoenix social media. My phone constantly rang with calls from unknown numbers, and my Facebook inbox was full of abusive messages. I felt like I was living in a storm of public opinion. Standing in my room, looking out the window, I wondered if my decision was correct. After seeing Austin's post go viral and receiving hundreds of abusive messages, I decided not to let it go. I contacted Attorney Grayson and asked him to help me sue Austin for defamation and for damaging my reputation. When they learned I was preparing to sue Austin, my parents came to beg me. My mom cried, telling me, "Don't sue Austin. He's your brother." My dad also pleaded, telling me, "Brian, I'm begging you, don't hurt the family anymore." I looked them straight in the eye and said, "It's too late. Austin chose this path." 1 month later, the trial took place at the district court. Attorney Grayson had prepared ample evidence. Screenshots of Austin's posts, a list of the threatening messages I received, and proof of the reputational damage I suffered. The trial's outcome was clear. Austin was found guilty and faced the following penalties: a $1,000 fine, and he was ordered to pay me $3,000 for reputational damages. Additionally, the court issued a restraining order, meaning Austin was prohibited from contacting or approaching me for 5 years. Finally, Austin had to remove all related posts and publish a public apology on social media. But the real consequences for Austin were far more severe. Unable to pay his casino debts, the loan sharks began to hunt him down. Austin was forced to flee Phoenix, going to another city to hide. I never received the $3,000 the court had ordered, but I still felt satisfied that I had gotten justice for myself. As for my parents, after the trial, they had to vacate the house according to the notice I had sent them on the day I received the will. They became homeless, forced to live temporarily in their car. Our relatives, after learning the truth about how they had kicked me out, distanced themselves and refused to help them. Justice was finally served, but my entire family's price was steep. Even though my parents had left the house at my request, I kept track of their lives from afar. Through Uncle Thomas, I learned they were having a tough time, sleeping in their car and constantly looking for temporary shelter. A week ago, almost 2 months after I'd kicked them out, they returned to the house and waited outside for me to get home from work. When they saw me, my mom approached with swollen eyes and said, "Brian, can you give us one last chance?" Immediately after, my dad spoke up, his voice hoarse. He said, "Son, please. We promise to respect your space and contribute to the living expenses." Looking at the two people who had so cruelly kicked me out, now begging to come back, I felt a complex, indescribable emotion. Part of me was still angry about what they'd done, but another part felt sympathy for their current situation. After a night of thinking, I decided to give them one last chance. But I set clear conditions. They weren't to contact Austin in any way, they had to contribute to the living expenses, and most importantly, they had to respect all my decisions regarding the house. They agreed immediately. Truth be told, I had my calculations. If Austin were to return, and they betrayed me again, I would sell the house and move somewhere else, and they would once again be homeless. When news of my decision spread, the reactions from relatives were divided. Many called me a doormat for taking back people who had betrayed me. They commented, "He's too weak. They'll just take advantage of him again." But many praised my decision, saying that's what a compassionate person does. Knowing how to forgive is noble. He gave them a lesson and now it's a second chance. What about you? What do you think of my final decision? Please leave your thoughts in the comments section below this story. I'd like to hear them. If this story touches your emotions, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like it, and share it. Thank you for following along. Shut up or get out. That's what my father said when I stepped up to speak the truth at my younger brother's engagement party. I had spent $5,000 on the baby shower for my first child. But once again, my parents took that money and used it on their golden boy. They thought I'd let it slide like always. But then, 2 years later, they came back asking for help. This is my story. Read it and tell me what you think. Should I help them or not? Hi, everyone. My name is Blake Monroe. I'm 30 years old and currently living with my wife and our 3-year-old son in the suburbs of Portland. I can honestly say life is good now, partly because of a stable job and partly because I inherited $1 million from my grandfather. That money wasn't initially meant for just me. According to the original will, the estate was supposed to be divided equally among my parents, my younger brother, and me. But 3 years ago, something happened that changed everything. When my first son was born, I decided to throw a small gathering at my parents' house to welcome our new family member. It was my mother's idea, actually. I sent her the full amount for the party, $5,000, with a straightforward hope that my son would be introduced to our extended family in a warm, loving atmosphere. But when we showed up, I was stunned. Everything had been set up for a completely different event. My younger brother's engagement party. My parents never asked me. I never even mentioned it. Even when I walked in, no one said a word about my son. Not one congrats. Not a single glance toward my wife, who stood there holding our newborn, entirely out of place in a room full of laughter and celebration. A few weeks after that incident, my grandfather, the only one who had stayed silent throughout the entire party, went to his attorney's office and asked to revise his will. He was still of sound mind and fully capable of making legal decisions. And he did right there, in front of a legal representative and witnesses. A year later, when he passed, the will was made public. My entire family was floored when they found out everything. Company shares, real estate, and every last cent had been left to me. I was born into a family that wasn't poor and definitely not lacking in love. But what we did lack was fairness, and that imbalance only grew over time. When we were little, my parents actually tried to treat my younger brother, Owen, and me equally. On holidays, we wore matching outfits and took turns with our toys. And if one of us got into trouble, both of us had to sit through one of Dad's life lessons. But everything changed when I turned 12. That day, Owen's teacher called home and said he had an exceptional talent for business. Owen shows financial reasoning and leadership skills well beyond his age, she said. From that moment on, the scales tipped hard. After that, my mom bought Owen the deluxe edition of Monopoly, signed him up for a kids' entrepreneurship summer camp, and couldn't stop bragging about his million-dollar ideas over dinner while he was still slurping spaghetti. And me? I wasn't quick like Owen, but I was steady. I wasn't the sharpest in the room, but I always finished what I started. I wasn't a great speaker, but I was meticulous with every task I took on. I was never called a prodigy or gifted, but I was the kid who never let my parents down. Still, to them, hard work didn't seem to count for much. And over time, the favoritism toward Owen only grew more obvious. I kept a high GPA all through middle school, never got a single complaint from teachers, and even received special recognition from the principal for outstanding effort. All I got from Dad was a nod. Meanwhile, the moment Owen won a local pitch competition, Mom threw him a little celebration dinner. I wasn't jealous back then, but I saw it for what it was. Owen was the shining hope, the golden child of the family. Growing up under the weight of such painful favoritism, I was lucky to have two people who quietly stood by my side. My grandfather and Uncle Andrew. Their homes were only about 10 miles from ours, and I'd usually spend weekends at my grandpa's place, unless it was exam season or I had some school activity. To most people, my grandfather came across as strict, cold, and even distant, but I knew better. His authentic self wasn't in how he looked but in those quiet moments when it was just the two of us in his little kitchen, lit by a warm yellow light. You don't need to be like anyone else to be good, he once told me after I skipped Owen's birthday party because I was too upset. Just do your part well, and keep your heart clean. Sometimes he'd call me over to help him clean up the backyard. But when the work was done, he'd slip a $100 bill into my hand, sometimes 2, even 3, and quietly say, "Save this for school. Don't tell anyone." His voice was low but firm, like he was making a promise. "If your mom finds out, I'll be in trouble." I always nodded, and I always hid the money away. Uncle Andrew was different. He asked me about school, about my friends, about the unfair things I noticed but never dared to say out loud. He was the first person who taught me how to open my bank account, how to fill out financial aid forms, and how to understand something that took me years to accept. Sometimes, family isn't your safety net, but they might hand you a walking stick so you can find your way forward. And then, right after I graduated high school and got a partial scholarship to a private university in the next state, I knew it was time to leave. If I stayed, I'd keep living in the same cycle of favoritism I'd grown far too used to. That day, I had just picked up my acceptance letter. It still smelled like fresh paper, and my name was embossed clearly on the university offer. I remember running home from the post office, my heart pounding with excitement. I planned to wait until after dinner, once the mood was relaxed, before sharing the news with my parents. But the moment I stepped through the door, I froze. Uncle Andrew and his family were there. It turns out they were over for a family dinner, something I'd completely forgotten about, buried in college paperwork. Dinner went on like usual. My mom talked about how Owen was attending a teen startup workshop in Seattle, and Dad asked Uncle Andrew about work. No one noticed me, even though I held the letter in my hands the entire meal. It wasn't until we all moved to the living room for tea that I finally worked up the courage. I stood up and said, "I just got accepted. Layton University. Partial scholarship." The room went quiet for a few seconds. Then Uncle Andrew broke the silence. He slapped his knee with a grin and said, "That's amazing, Blake. I'm really proud of you. You've worked hard. You earned this." I smiled, my heart still racing. I turned to my parents, hoping for a warm look, or even just a nod. But my father crossed his arms, leaned back in his chair, and responded with calculated coldness. "Partial scholarship, right? That still leaves a lot to cover: tuition, housing, books. That's not cheap." I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. "I know. That's why I'm not asking for much. Just $10,000 for the first year. After that, I'll handle the rest." My mom set her teacup down and chimed in right away. "Blake, you need to be realistic. We can't throw money into something with no guaranteed return. Your brother is different. Owen has potential. He'll take this family somewhere." I froze at her words. I didn't expect her to say it like that, like I wasn't even her child. My father nodded. "You didn't do anything wrong. But if we have to choose, the money has to go where it counts. And in this case, that's your brother." I swallowed hard. I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm just asking for fairness. He looked at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. In this house, fairness doesn't mean splitting things equally. Fairness means putting things where they belong. And if you can't accept that, then move out. His words were ice cold. I had nothing left to say. I looked at my mom one last time, hoping for a softened gaze, but she just lowered her eyes and stayed silent. Right then, Uncle Andrew spoke up, his voice sharp, unlike his usual calm tone. Do you two really believe that? Both kids are your children. How can you talk like Blake's not worth investing in? My father didn't even turn to face him. He just said dryly, "This is our family business. Please don't get involved." No one said another word after that. 2 minutes later, Uncle Andrew stood up with his wife and son and left the house. I went upstairs, shut my door, and didn't turn on the lights. That night, I sat on the floor in silence, still holding the acceptance letter I once thought would make my whole family proud. That night, I couldn't sleep. I just lay there staring at the ceiling in the dark, my mind spinning nonstop. A part of me wished I was strong enough to get up right then, pack my things and walk away from that house for good. But I couldn't. Not yet. The next morning, around 8 a.m., my phone rang. It was Uncle Andrew. "Blake, come to my place. Now." His voice was calm, but there was something urgent underneath. I didn't ask questions. I just threw on clothes and drove the 15 minutes to his house. He was already waiting when I arrived. In the kitchen, the smell of freshly brewed coffee hung softly in the air. We sat across from each other at the table. He poured coffee into 2 ceramic mugs, then got straight to the point. "I'm giving you $50,000. No interest. You'll pay it back within 5 years after you graduate. Deal?" I sat in silence, stunned. The steam from the cup fogged up my glasses, but I knew the warmth rising in my chest wasn't from the coffee. I lowered my head, hands clasped together, then looked up and asked quietly, "Why are you doing this for me?" He paused, gently rotating the mug in his hands, then looked at me with softened eyes. "Because I can't stand watching you be mistreated, and I won't let that unfairness steal your future." He paused again, then spoke slowly, as if weighing every word. "You deserve the same starting line as anyone else. Not because of who your parents are, but because of what you've worked for." My heart clenched, but this time it wasn't pain. It was that rare feeling when someone truly sees you. After a moment, I finally replied, "But I only need $10,000 for the first year," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "That amount, it's too much. I don't want to take on a big debt." He shook his head. His voice was calm, but his eyes didn't waver. "No, I want you to focus on school. Don't get distracted by money. Don't take night shifts, don't drive Uber, don't fall asleep in class because you're juggling 3 jobs. If you stumble, no one in that house is going to catch you." I looked at him, speechless. My chest felt hot, part gratitude, part something caught in my throat. "One more thing," he added, his tone serious. "Don't tell your parents. Trust me. If they know you have that money, they'll find a way to drain every last cent." I nodded quickly. "I promise." On the way home, I stopped by the bank and opened a new account in my name. 2 days later, just like he said, the $50,000 showed up. I stared at the number on the screen, hands still shaking. Not because it was a significant amount, but because, for the first time in my life, someone truly believed in me. No strings attached, no comparisons, just faith. And in that moment, I thought, if there's anyone who ever deserved to be called Dad in my life, it's Uncle Andrew. 4 years of college passed quietly. My family never found out that Uncle Andrew had loaned me the money. I only went home for occasions like Christmas, Thanksgiving, or my mother's birthday. On weekends, I chose to go back to my grandfather's or Uncle Andrew's house, places where I knew someone would always welcome me with open arms. Even with the $50,000 loan from my uncle, I never let myself slack off. I still worked part-time at the campus library and the coffee shop. I didn't want to touch that money unless necessary. Instead, I focused on doing my best academically, applying for scholarships, financial aid, and whatever small awards the school offered. By the time I graduated, I had used only about $20,000 of the total. The rest remained untouched in the account. I graduated at 23 and was lucky enough to land my first job at a mid-sized tech company in Seattle. Starting salary, $50,000 a year, a number that, nearly a decade ago, was still a dream for fresh grads. I lived frugally, didn't rent a fancy apartment, didn't take expensive trips. Every month, I set aside money to repay that $50,000. And exactly 2 years later, just as I turned 25, I went to see Uncle Andrew to pay it all back. I remember that day so clearly. The air was crisp, he was out back tidying up the yard, and I walked in with a confidence I'd never felt before. "Uncle Andrew," I said, "I'm here to pay back the full $50,000. He wiped his hands on an old towel and looked at me for a long moment. Then he shook his head, half smiling, half serious. "You don't need to pay it back," he said. "Come with me. There's someone I want you to meet." I was surprised but didn't ask any questions. I just followed him, got in the car, and 15 minutes later, when we pulled up to my grandfather's house, I still had no idea what was going on. As soon as we parked, we headed inside. The living room looked exactly as it had the last time I was there. Tidy and well kept, with that brown leather armchair still sitting by the window. My grandfather was in it, gazing out at the garden. But the moment he heard the door open, he turned around right away. He was 75 now, his hair almost entirely white, but his back was still straight, his eyes still sharp, and he still carried that quiet authority I'd known since I was a kid. I was about to greet him, but Uncle Andrew stepped forward first. He turned to me and spoke slowly. "The $50,000 wasn't from me. It was from your grandfather." I froze. Uncle looked back at him, then continued, "That same night, when your parents refused to help with school, I came here and told him everything. He didn't need to hear the whole story. He just said one thing. He's the only one who's never asked for anything. So this time, let him ask." He turned to me again, voice softer now. "But your grandpa was afraid. Afraid you'd rely on it too much. Afraid if your parents found out, they'd try to take a share. So he asked me to put it in my name, to loan it to you, as a test." I couldn't speak. My throat was tight. My grandfather slowly leaned forward, used the armrest to stand, and walked over. He placed his hand on my shoulder, firmly but gently, just enough for me to feel the weight of everything he was saying. "You kept your word," he said. "You lived right. You didn't ask for more. You didn't run away from anything. So that money doesn't need to be paid back." I lowered my head. Emotions swelled like a wave, but I swallowed them whole. Before I left, he turned back, his voice calm but firm. "I'm proud of you. Now that you're working, don't forget to stop by and visit your old man once in a while." I nodded, afraid that if I opened my mouth, I might cry. Uncle's car engine started just as the sky began to turn dusky. The sunset poured through the windshield, warming my face. But deep inside, I felt something I had never known so clearly before. What it meant to be truly loved without having to fight for it. Just live with integrity, and keep the promises you make. A year later, I met Anna. She was a nurse, gentle, genuine, and patient in a way I'd always felt I didn't deserve. We got married, and 3 years ago, Austin was born. His arrival was the most beautiful thing that's ever happened in my life. He gave everything meaning. I worked harder, came home earlier, and every morning, the first thing I did was smile at him sleeping peacefully beside us. I kept thinking, after everything, maybe my son would be the reason my parents finally changed. That becoming grandparents, holding their first grandchild, would make them leave the favoritism behind. I wanted to believe they'd love Austin the way I used to wish they'd loved me. But I was wrong. Not only did they not love him, they turned what should have been the most special day of his life into a scar. A scar that didn't just mark a memory but became the final push behind a decision I should have made years ago, to cut ties with my family, completely. 3 years ago, just a few days after Austin was born, I got a call from my mother. Her voice was gentle, sweet, like there had never been any distance between us. "Come home," she said. "I want to throw a little party to welcome Austin. Just a chance to introduce him to the family and maybe bring everyone closer again." I was a bit surprised but also touched. Without overthinking, I said yes. And since she insisted on handling everything, I transferred her $5,000 to help cover the costs. 2 weeks later, on a Saturday evening around 6, Anna and I packed up Austin and headed to my parents' house. As we stepped out of the car, I was taken aback by the scene in front of us. The house was decorated far more lavishly than I expected. Tables stretched across the backyard, string lights twinkled from the porch, scented candles, balloons, and even a large backdrop standing in the garden with glittery capital letters. But as I walked closer, I froze. The words weren't, "Welcome, baby Austin." They read, Owen and Madison's engagement party. My whole body went cold. I gripped Anna's hand tightly. She looked at me, confused. And there I stood, in the middle of my childhood home's backyard, holding my newborn son. Like a guest who wasn't invited to the party he thought he'd thrown for his child. The emotions I'd been swallowing felt like a balloon being squeezed past its limit. I clenched my fists, stared straight at the backdrop, Owen and Madison's engagement party, and shouted across the garden full of guests. What the hell is going on here? Instantly, the music cut off. Every eye turned toward me. My mother rushed over, placing a hand on mine. Her voice rushed and flustered. Blake, this is a shared party. I just thought combining them would be easier. I stepped back, staring at her. A shared party? Did you ever tell me that? She said nothing. I pointed at the backdrop. If this is a shared party, then where's Austin's name? Where is my son in any of this? Still no answer. Right then, my father stepped out of the house, hands in his pockets, his voice deep and cold. Don't turn this into a scene. Are you trying to embarrass the whole family? I turned to him. For a second, I felt every moment of the years I'd spent being overlooked crash into my chest. Then I glanced to the left. Uncle Andrew and my grandfather were standing quietly near the garden's edge. Neither said a word, but they both nodded at me. And that was enough. They were with me. I didn't hold back anymore. I fired back at my father. This family image you're trying to protect, did it ever include me? I stepped forward, my voice rising. I paid for a party to welcome my son. I thought maybe this time I'd get to be the priority. But no, nothing's changed. Still lies. Still treating me like the outsider. Right then, I guess my father hit his breaking point, too. He snapped, his voice sharp and guttural. Shut up, or get out. I stared straight into his eyes, said nothing. Then I turned, walked up to the stage, and grabbed the mic from the stunned MC. The whole yard went silent. I lifted my head, voice steady, every word landing with weight. If anyone's wondering what's going on, let me clear it up. I looked around at everyone. My aunts, uncles, cousins, old friends, and Madison. The stunned bride-to-be standing beside Owen. This party? It was paid for with my money. I gave my mother $5,000 to throw a welcome party for my newborn son, Austin. Instead, they quietly turned it into my brother's engagement celebration. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. I gripped the mic tighter, my voice dropping lower. And this isn't new. I've had scholarships pulled, been asked to step aside, and told to figure it out on my own, because I was never the priority. Owen's always been the golden boy, always the center of everything. I paused, took a deep breath and looked at Austin. Snuggled in Anna's arms, his cheeks flushed, wide-eyed at the noise. But today is different, because I'm a father now. And my son. He's never going to grow up in silence the way I did. I lowered the mic. No one moved. No one stopped me. For the first time in my life, my voice echoed through a home that had spent years pretending not to hear me. As soon as I finished speaking, the air felt frozen. But at that exact moment, I saw my father start moving toward the stage. His face twisted with rage, like he might rip the mic from my hands. He moved fast, almost charging forward. But Uncle Andrew stepped out just in time, blocking his path. They stood close, just for a few seconds, but Uncle never broke eye contact with him. He raised one hand, placing it gently but firmly against my father's chest. A gesture that wasn't forceful, yet strong enough for everyone to see exactly what it meant. Blake wasn't standing alone. My father froze, trembling with anger, but didn't say another word. I turned back to the crowd, my voice low, steady, not shaken at all. Some of you might think I'm overreacting today, but what happened at this party? It's just the last drop in a glass that overflowed a long time ago. I looked directly at my parents. Not with fury anymore, but with the cold, drained exhaustion of someone who has nothing left to lose. And if one day, Austin asks me about his grandparents, I paused for a moment, then spoke each word slowly, like I was carving it into my bones. I'll tell him you're dead. The silence was absolute. Not even the cicadas dared to break it. I continued, voice unwavering. From this moment on, I'm no longer your son. Go live your lives with your golden child. The garden stayed deathly still. You could have heard a leaf fall. I dropped the mic, stepped off the stage, and walked straight to my wife and son. Moments later, we left the party. My grandfather and Uncle Andrew followed right behind. When we reached the car, my grandfather placed his hand on my shoulder. He looked me in the eye and said, "Well done, my boy." And in that moment I knew I had done the right thing. The next morning, just as I finished brewing my coffee, my phone buzzed. A message from Owen. "Are you happy now? The party's ruined. Madison called off the engagement, and everything's fallen apart. All because of you." I didn't respond. Instead, I pressed and held the message, then deleted it. I didn't want to keep a single word from anyone who had always seen me as a thorn in their side. The months that followed were strangely peaceful. No more noisy relatives. No more forced small talk from my parents. Life slowed down, for me, Anna, and Austin. On weekends, we often took Austin to visit Grandpa and Uncle Andrew. My grandfather, the man who had quietly opened a new door for me, adored Austin. Every time we visited, he would sit in his armchair and watch as Austin crawled around the living room rug, shaking a plastic toy that rattled with every movement. He didn't say much, just observed quietly, smiling, sometimes mumbling softly to himself, like he was talking to someone else, maybe to the past. There was a time when I thought I'd lost a family, but in those quiet afternoons I realized I still had one, and I was building it again piece by piece. But nature has its way of reminding us that nothing lasts forever. A year after Austin was born, on a Monday morning, while I was at the office, Uncle Andrew called. His voice was strained, tight. "Your grandfather, he's gone." The chill that ran through me was instant. Just 2 days earlier, he had been fine. He had told me he was rereading The Old Man and the Sea and that he wanted to buy Austin a giant wooden block set. I never got to say thank you. I never got to hug him one last time. Losing him was a profound, personal loss. Not just because he was the last person in the family who loved me unconditionally, but because he was the first person who ever taught me the value of quiet strength. 1 month after my grandfather passed, the entire family was invited to his home for the reading of his will. By 9 a.m., the living room was packed. Then, a silver-haired man named Walter Crowley, my grandfather's attorney, stepped forward and began. He opened with formalities, confirming the presence of all relevant parties, reviewing the date the final will was written, and affirming that my grandfather, Harold Monroe, was of sound mind and full legal capacity when he drafted the document. And then he started reading. Everyone had a share. Uncle Andrew had left the lakeside cabin and shares in a small construction company my grandfather had quietly invested in. Aunt Carol received the vintage Ford Thunderbird that had sat untouched in the garage for nearly 2 decades. Aunt Linda was granted full ownership of a rental property in Tacoma, along with a sizable cash amount. One by one, names were read. Assets were clearly listed. But when it came to my parents, he paused. Mr. Crowley glanced down at the page, then looked up, his voice calm but firm. "The final section of this will pertain to the assets that, under normal circumstances, would have been assigned to Mr. Richard Monroe and Mrs. Martha Monroe." All eyes in the room immediately shifted to my parents. My father sat up straighter, as if already bracing to hear how much he was getting. Mr. Crowley turned the page and continued in the same even tone. "After careful and voluntary consideration, Mr. Harold Monroe has decided to transfer all assets originally intended for his son, Richard Monroe, and daughter-in-law, Martha Monroe, to his grandson, Blake Monroe." A wave of murmurs rolled through the room. Mr. Crowley paused, then read aloud the written statement from the will. "I do this not because I do not love my son, but because I can no longer turn a blind eye to the injustice that Blake Monroe has endured for years. The clear favoritism shown by Richard and Martha toward their younger son, Owen, has caused Blake lasting harm, culminating in the incident where they used Blake's money to fund Owen Monroe's engagement party without prior notice or permission." The living room erupted. My father shot up from his seat and slammed his hand on the table. "What? This is outrageous. It's a setup. He pointed directly at me. "He and Andrew planned this whole thing." My mother broke into tears. My brother Owen threw his water glass on the floor, voice cracking with frustration. "This isn't fair." But Mr. Crowley didn't flinch. He tapped once on the file in front of him and raised his voice just enough to be heard over the commotion. "I ask everyone to remain calm." He fixed his gaze on my parents and Owen and spoke with cold precision. "Mr. and Mrs. Monroe and Mr. Owen Monroe, please respect the wishes of the deceased. This will is legally binding, signed and witnessed in full mental clarity, with complete supporting documentation. Any attempt to contest, distort, or disrupt the process will be subject to legal consequences." No one said another word. The room fell into a heavy, frozen silence. After the will was read, as I stepped out the front door, my father was already waiting at the gate. He looked at me, not with the same rage he'd shown in the living room, but with a cold, bitter venom in his eyes. "You bastard," he hissed through clenched teeth. "You think this means you've won?" I didn't say a word. I gave him one look, then walked straight to my car, opened the door, and drove away. Never looked back. I thought that after that day they'd cause a scene, file complaints, threaten lawsuits, maybe even show up at my door demanding answers. But no, nothing, not a word. Maybe they knew this time the price wouldn't be small, and they knew this time I wouldn't back down. The following 2 years passed faster than I expected. Austin is 3 now. He's no longer the tiny baby I used to cradle in my arms. He runs around the house, rolls across the yard, and throws tantrums that make me unsure whether to laugh or surrender. I kept living the life I chose, with Anna, with our son, in a small house filled with sunlight and laughter. No texts, no calls. No one even mentioned the words mom or dad. I thought maybe that was it. Perhaps they'd finally accepted that I was no longer a part of that family. Until 2 days ago. The sun had just dipped when the doorbell rang. I opened the door and froze. It was my mother. She stood there, thinner than I remembered. Her hair was messy, her face hollow. She didn't speak right away, just stood there for a moment, then finally said with a trembling voice, "Your father's in the hospital. The doctors say he needs surgery. I don't know what to do anymore. Blake, please, I need $70,000 to cover the cost. I'm begging you." But I didn't feel sympathy. I didn't feel anger either. Just a long, empty silence pressing in my chest. I looked at her and asked plainly, "Where's Owen?" She pressed her lips together, then whispered, "He doesn't have the money." I nodded slowly, then looked her straight in the eyes. "Then sell the house you two live in. Sell it and take care of him." She froze. I stepped back, hand resting on the door. "From the day you both hurt my son, right after he was born, I stopped being part of your lives." Then I said it, firm and final. "If you don't leave my doorstep right now, I'm calling the police." She stood there for a few seconds longer, then turned away quietly. I closed the door behind her, and I didn't look back. Even though I've completely cut ties with them, deep down, something still doesn't feel fully at peace. I don't know if I was right or wrong to turn them away in their time of need. Part of me says I did the right thing, that after all the hurt they caused, I don't owe them anything. But there are moments when I wonder, if tomorrow I were the one lying in a hospital bed, would I want them to show up? Will my son, someday, understand the decision I made? I don't want to go back to being that boy I once was, the one who stayed quiet, endured everything, and kept making excuses for the pain others caused him. I stood up. I protected my son. But still, was the price of that clarity too cold? And that's why I'm sharing this story, not for praise and not to justify myself, but to ask you, the kind souls who've stayed with me through every word, was I wrong to turn my back on my parents when they needed me most? Was I too cruel? Or was I simply trying to protect what I believe is right? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. I genuinely want to hear your perspective, whether you agree with me or not. And if you think this story is worth sharing, don't forget to like, subscribe, and pass it along to anyone who's ever struggled with the pain that comes with the word family. Thank you for listening. See you again in the following story. At the Christmas party, my father shouted in my face, "This family has given you everything, and you gave nothing back." That statement cut through the festive air like a knife, plunging the room into a cold silence. All because I refused the demand to buy iPads as gifts for my 2 nieces and nephews, my sister's children. At that moment, everyone, from my mother to my sister and brother-in-law, remained silent in agreement, as if I truly was the ungrateful person they always thought. After those words, I didn't argue. I just quietly left and began implementing my plan, which would stun the entire family when the truth was revealed at the Easter party. Join me as I step into the story of those fateful months after that Christmas party, where I learned the most valuable lesson. Sometimes, to love yourself, you must let go of the people you love most. Hello everyone, I'm Mitchell, 30, living alone in Seattle, Washington. My small apartment is on Capitol Hill, with many coffee shops and green spaces. Currently, I work as an architect for a well-known design company in the city. This job has allowed me to express my creativity and build a stable life. In the past, every weekend, I used to return to my parents' home in Tacoma for dinner and to enjoy family time. That habit continued after I graduated from college and started working. During those weekend visits, my mother would cook elaborate dinners, my father would tell old stories, and sometimes the whole family would watch a favorite movie together. Those evenings were something I looked forward to each week. But 3 years ago, I stopped showing up after an argument with my family. Everything changed after that Christmas party. A bitter memory I still can't forget. The words, accusations, and feelings of betrayal forced me to make the hardest decision of my life. Since that day, I've learned to live for myself, no longer allowing others to take advantage of me. I realized that true love doesn't come with demands and conditions. I began building a new circle of friends, spending time on forgotten hobbies, and focusing on personal growth. I discovered that sometimes painful decisions bring necessary changes to our lives. That Christmas party was held at my parents' house. A few days before, my mother called to remind me that I had to attend. After nearly an hour of driving from Seattle, I arrived at my parents' house around 5 p.m. When I arrived, I saw my sister Riley's car parked in front of the gate. After parking my car neatly, I grabbed the bottle of wine and the gift bag I had prepared for everyone and headed inside. That day, I had thoughtfully prepared gifts with an 18-year-old scotch for Dad, a handcrafted scarf for Mom, and educational toys I had spent time selecting for my 2 nieces and nephews. Since it was Christmas, my parents didn't close the gate as they did on other days, so I walked right in. When I entered the house, my 2 nieces and nephews, Stella and Michael, exclaimed, "Uncle Mitchell is here." At that moment, I saw in the living room my dad and brother-in-law Adam sitting and chatting happily while Riley and my mother Mrs. Everly were cooking in the kitchen. The atmosphere that day was truly warm. The aroma of roasted turkey and apple pie wafting from the kitchen, and the pine scent from the Christmas tree placed in the living room corner created that familiar holiday atmosphere I always remember. After ruffling my niece and nephew's hair, I placed the bottle of wine on the table. As soon as he saw the gift, my dad said, "That's exactly the whiskey I like." I felt happy because he had complimented me at that moment. Praise from my father wasn't easy to come by. He always had high expectations and rarely expressed satisfaction. But a simple compliment like that made me feel warm inside, as if all my efforts were finally being acknowledged. Around 6 p.m., the party officially began. My mother had spent the whole day preparing the meals, and family gatherings like this were occasions for her to showcase all her cooking talents. My family didn't invite relatives that year, but the party atmosphere was warm. We ate while talking. My parents talked about work, occasionally complaining a bit about life. My father complained about his health, while my mother made light complaints about how the new neighbor was taking care of their garden. My brother-in-law Adam and I had casual discussions about real estate projects and the development potential of Capitol Hill, where I was living. Meanwhile, the 2 kids occasionally fought over food, and afterward, if one couldn't get what they wanted, they would tell on each other to their grandparents. Stella and Michael, now 8 and 10 years old, argued all day, and their parents had to intervene many times when neither would yield to the other. Riley, my sister, frequently had to remind them, but it seemed like these reminders only worked for a few minutes. And honestly, I felt genuinely happy to have such a family during that Christmas dinner at the table. That familiar feeling of a family evening, laughter mixed with the sound of cutlery, warm lights reflecting on familiar faces. I was lucky, even though my relationship with my parents wasn't always smooth. But I had no idea I would face a situation completely overturning everything I thought about my family in just a few minutes. A moment that would change everything I had spent years building. Around 7:30 in the evening, after dinner, came the Christmas gift exchange. The living room became even cozier as we gathered around the sparkling Christmas tree. After my parents gave their gifts, it was my turn to provide them with mine. After seeing the handcrafted scarf, my mother's eyes filled with joy. She gently stroked each stitch on the scarf, then draped it over her shoulders. With a slightly choked voice, my mother looked at me affectionately and said, "Mitchell, you know I love this color. It will be hot this winter." At that moment, I felt happy too and knew I had made the right choice with that gift. Sometimes the simplest gifts bring the most meaning, and I spent a lot of time choosing a gift that matched my mother's taste. After giving my mother her gift, I brought 2 boxes for my niece and nephew. Initially, they were excited when they saw the 2 carefully wrapped boxes decorated with snowmen and reindeer. Stella and Michael quickly tore through the wrapping paper, their eyes excitedly bright. But disappointment spread across their faces after opening them, contrary to what I had expected. Stella held the educational STEM building set in her hands while Michael looked at the science book set indifferently. There were no cheers of joy or words of thanks. After that, with obvious disappointment, Stella turned to her brother and said, "I thought it was going to be an iPad. Who needs this stuff?" Michael immediately chimed in, his voice full of contempt. "Yeah, Uncle Mitchell is so cheap." At that moment, I was surprised by their attitude. It felt like someone had just thrown a bucket of cold water in my face. I had spent a lot of time choosing gifts that I thought would help their education with long-term value. But what surprised me even more was Riley's attitude. She didn't say or do anything to correct the children. Instead, with obvious sarcasm, Riley looked at me and said, "You make over $100,000 a year, and yet you give them these cheap things?" Meanwhile, Adam, my brother-in-law, silently stared into his glass of wine as if trying to avoid this conversation. The moment those words were spoken, I immediately understood that she was the one who had spoiled the two children. I felt anger rising but held it back because I didn't want to ruin the Christmas atmosphere. I tried to keep a smile, but inside, I felt uncomfortable. After Riley's comment, I tried to let it go, but things didn't go as I had hoped. Stella and Michael immediately ran to their grandfather, complaining and begging him as always. Michael said with his familiar whiny voice, "Grandpa, I don't like that gift. I want an iPad. Can you buy me one?" Stella also grabbed his hand and begged, her teary eyes looking at him full of expectation. At that moment, I sighed helplessly. I thought my father would find a way to advise them, but no. He turned to me, and with a stern look, my father shouted, "Mitchell, did you hear what the kids said? They want iPads. Buy them those right now." Right then, I felt that if I gave in to this demand, I would have to give in to their other needs in the future. I looked straight into my father's eyes, and with a firm voice, I said directly, "No, there will be no iPads. iPads are not appropriate gifts for the children." After I said that, the kids still clung to my father. Stella even started crying, her sobs echoing through the room. At this point, my father's voice grew louder. He stood up, pointing directly at my face. "Don't argue with me. You need to love your niece and nephew. If you can't buy it today, buy it for them tomorrow." At that moment, I couldn't take it anymore. I said directly to my father with disappointed eyes, "If you want to spoil them, you go buy them yourself. I don't have extra money to meet those unreasonable demands." After that statement, my father stepped closer, his face red with anger, and with all his fury, he shouted right in my face, "This family has given you everything, and you gave nothing back." At that moment, everything inside me nearly collapsed. I looked around the house. My mother sat silently watching, her hands tightly gripping the scarf I had just given her. The two kids were quiet, probably out of fear, their eyes following every gesture of the adults. My spineless brother-in-law was now sitting there looking at his phone with shaking hands, deliberately avoiding my gaze. Only one person had a smug look on her face, and that was Riley. Not only did she not stop the argument between my father and me, but Riley came close to me with a contemptuous look after my father's shout, then spoke loudly for the whole room to hear, "Dad's right. You only take what's yours and never give anything to anyone." And after that statement, I couldn't control myself anymore. I turned to my mother, the only one still silent, and with a desperate voice, I shouted, Say something." And then, after a few heavy seconds of silence, my mother looked up, her eyes avoiding mine, her voice stammering, "I think your father and Riley are right." My mother's response hit me like a fatal blow. Just minutes before, I could feel the happy atmosphere of Christmas Day. Still, less than 10 minutes later, due to the unreasonable demands of two children, that atmosphere instantly changed to almost hatred. After all those words from them, I wanted to stand up and argue and shout in their faces about what I had done wrong. But in that moment, looking at those familiar faces becoming strangers, I made a different decision that would surely make them regret later. After all their words, I stood up, grabbed my coat, and left. With a pretend reconciling tone, my brother-in-law, still trying to appear innocent, said, "Mitchell, why are you leaving so early? Stay a bit longer and have a few more beers." After that comment, I didn't say anything to him. I just silently looked at everyone in the room that day, looking at my mother with the scarf still clutched in her hands, my father with his angry eyes, Riley with her triumphant face, and my niece and nephew sniffling. I didn't say anything. I just gently closed the door behind me and stepped into the cold Christmas night. That night, I returned to my apartment feeling terrible. After making myself a cup of coffee, I sat in the living room, opened the banking app on my phone, went to the transfer section, reviewed the amounts I had spent, and my head kept thinking about what my father had said. This family has given you everything, and you gave nothing back. He said that I would accept if I had never contributed anything to the family. But the truth is, I had given a lot. I remember the day I had just graduated and started working. As soon as my father knew I had received my first paycheck, in a commanding tone, he suggested, "Mitchell, you should treat the whole family to a meal to celebrate. That's our family tradition." And at that time, although I didn't want to, I still agreed because I wanted to keep the family atmosphere peaceful. A portion of my hard-earned first month's salary went to that dinner, where Riley and my father ordered the most expensive items on the menu. Perhaps some of you hearing this might think that treating everyone to a meal is right when you get a job, but why didn't I want to? Because, since I was 18, I had to cover my expenses, from tuition to living costs. That year, I was lucky to receive a full scholarship for architecture at a university. I still vividly remember receiving the notification letter. Happiness and pride overwhelmed me. When I went home to tell them the news, instead of congratulations, with fake concerned faces, they complained to me, "Son, we don't have enough money to cover your living expenses." Because at that time, they had loaned all of their savings to my sister to open a fashion business. An investment that, to this day, I still don't know where it went because Riley's store only lasted less than a year. So at that time, I only had two choices. Either take out student loans to cover expenses or work part-time to support myself. And I chose to both study and work part-time. During the 4 years that followed, there wasn't a single day I got to rest truly. During the week, I worked evenings at a coffee shop near school. On weekends, I worked at an Italian restaurant from 7 in the morning until 11 at night. Winter days were so cold it cut through skin and flesh, yet I still had to bike through the snow to work because I couldn't afford the bus fare. Throughout those 4 years, I still came home for Christmas, Thanksgiving, or family gatherings where relatives were present, but they never asked if I was okay. No one ever wondered about the calluses on my hands after long work shifts. So that's why I didn't want to treat them to a meal after receiving my first paycheck. But then, as always, I gave in, still trying to please them. And things didn't just stop with that meal. About 2 months later, with a worried voice over the phone, my mother called asking, "Mitchell, I hate to do this, but could I borrow $1,500 from you to pay your father's hospital bill?" After that request for help, I didn't hesitate to transfer $2,000 directly to her so she could pay the hospital bill and take better care of my father. Additionally, the next day, I took a day off to go and care for him in the hospital. He had severe pneumonia and had to be hospitalized for over a week. That amount, although my mother said it was a loan, she never mentioned paying it back, but I never intended to ask for it back because I thought the money spent on my father's health was worth it. To me, it was the responsibility of a son. And in the months that followed, my father lost his ability to work and couldn't continue his job. The family then depended entirely on my mother. Although only my father and mother lived together, their monthly expenses were always over $2,000. And then one weekend, during a visit, I accidentally overheard my mother's phone conversation. With a tired and worried voice, she told a friend, "I don't know how to cover all our expenses this month. My salary isn't enough and my husband can't work." And I, after hearing my mother complain once, decided to support them with an additional $500 each month. Additionally, I set up automatic transfers to ensure that money always reached my mother on time, no matter how busy I was. And I did that continuously and regularly for more than 3 years. My parents and I helped Riley and her husband many times. The money I spent on gifts, toys, and extra classes for the kids 3 years after I started working was no less than $4,000. Whenever Stella wanted to learn piano or Michael wanted to join swimming classes, I always offered to pay the tuition because I thought they were my niece and nephew, so there was no need to keep count. And besides that, one day, with a somber face, Riley even borrowed $15,000 from me to invest in opening a coffee shop with a friend. I never asked for or mentioned that amount because I understood she was raising young children. But that coffee shop only lasted 6 months, and my money disappeared as if it had never existed. Yet after all I had given, they not only didn't thank me but collectively said I contributed nothing to the family. Those words kept echoing in my head, like an old song stuck on repeat. At that moment, looking at my phone screen with the banking app open, I thought that if they wouldn't acknowledge what I'd done, there was no reason for me to give anymore. I started operating on the screen, canceling my mother's automatic $500 monthly payment. At the same time, I promised myself that there would never be another expense for them. The next morning, I woke up quite early, feeling better emotionally but physically tired after going to bed quite late. After last night's decision, the morning coffee and the faint sunlight through the window helped me feel somewhat calmer. I thought everything was over until 8 o'clock when my phone vibrated with Riley's name on the screen. I answered after the third call. I didn't want to take that call, but I also wanted to hear what she had to say, and what happened next left me stunned. When I picked up, she got straight to the point with a fake sweet voice. "Mitchell, the kids and I have reconsidered. We don't need iPads anymore. Could you consider giving them piano lessons and basketball classes instead? I think those classes would be more beneficial." I was shocked after that request. She didn't say anything about last night's party, not a single apology, or at least a word of concern. Instead, it was another request, as if no argument had ever happened, as if my only role was to meet their demands. Right then, with an even tone, I replied directly, "You should see a doctor, Riley. I think you're very sick." Immediately, on the other end, Riley shouted, her voice full of surprise. "What do you mean?" At that point, I no longer needed to maintain harmony. With a firm voice, I said straight out, "Take care of your kids. I'm done being an ATM." At that moment, a frighteningly silent pause occurred. I could hear Riley's heavy breathing through the phone and feel the anger rising in her. And then, I continued, my voice still calm but determined. "For the $15,000, I'm giving you 30 days to pay it back. I'll send you an email later. Also, tell Mom I've canceled the monthly $500 payment." Right after that, with a choked voice mixed with anger, Riley shouted, "We're family. How could you do this?" After that question, I answered concisely, each word slow and clear. "No family just takes advantage of each other. Remember what you all said yesterday." I still remember. After saying that, I hung up. She called back twice after that, but I just silently pressed reject. Then, I turned off the ringer and set the phone aside. And that was when I felt I had control over my life for the first time in many years. After Riley's call, around 11 o'clock, my phone vibrated again. This time, my mother's name appeared on the screen. I looked at the ringing phone, but it didn't pick up. I knew she was calling to ask about the $500, and I didn't want to talk any more about that money. These conversations always ended with me feeling guilty and giving in, but this time would be different. That same afternoon, I drove downtown and parked outside an office building. I went to the office of Grayson, a lawyer who specialized in civil lawsuits related to loans. With a professional look after hearing my case, the lawyer took it on for a fee of $1,500. I agreed to pay this amount because I knew Riley would never pay me back if I didn't take serious action. And just 2 days later, Grayson emailed me confirming he had sent a notice demanding repayment of the $15,000 to Riley on paper and by email. In the email, he wrote, "We have officially sent the debt collection notice. We will wait for 30 days. If she doesn't cooperate, we will file a petition with the court." Right after I finished reading Grayson's email, my phone notified me of a message from Riley. The message was short, with just the content. "You are so selfish and cruel." After reading that message, I wasn't sad. I just sighed lightly. The anger from yesterday seemed to have vanished, replaced by a strange, empty feeling. I didn't reply to that message. I just put down the phone and continued with the work I had been doing. About a week later, while working in my office, my bank account reported a balance change with an additional $15,000, with no note underneath. But I knew it was the money Riley was paying me back. Right after that, I called Grayson to inform him that I had received the money so he could close the file. About 2 weeks later, my phone continuously received messages from my father and mother, interspersed with missed calls. With a heavy heart, I opened my phone and saw a series of messages from my parents about the monthly $500. My mother's first message pleads, "Mitchell, why hasn't the money arrived this month? I need to pay the electricity and water bills already." Next was a message from my father with a harsher tone. "Mitchell, I don't know what game you're playing, but you need to send your mother the money right now. The utility companies have already sent the bills." Then my mother again. "If you're angry about Christmas, I apologize, but I need that money. How could you let your parents suffer like this?" And my father once more, with words becoming increasingly harsh. "Are you even my son? How can you treat your parents this way? Send the money or I'll call your boss." After that message, I smiled bitterly. My father didn't know which company I worked for. How could he call my boss? I continued scrolling through the messages, each harsher than the last, with more threats. Finally, after reading all the messages, I decided to reply to both with a single message. I have decided to stop the monthly financial support. After years of receiving help, you've had enough time to make your financial plans. I will not change this decision. Just minutes after the message was sent, my phone rang. I hesitated for a moment, then decided to answer to end everything. With a choked voice, my mother said as soon as I picked up, "Why are you doing this to your parents? We're old now, we can't earn extra income." Right after her words, I said, "Mom, do you remember what Dad said to me at the Christmas party?" After my question, my mother was silent. I continued, "Dad said that the family had given me everything and I gave nothing back, and you agreed with that statement. If I've never given anything in your eyes, then I've decided that from now on, I truly won't give anymore." And then, my mother's voice began to sob after what I said. She said, "That was just something said in anger. We need you, Mitchell." As my mother spoke those words, I felt a sharp pain in my heart. But I said directly to her, "You don't need me. You only need my money. Those are two completely different things." And then, I heard my father's voice on the other end. He must have grabbed the phone from my mother's hand. With an angry voice, he shouted, "You're a selfish and cruel son. You abandon your parents when they need you most." Hearing this, I couldn't control myself anymore. I yelled at him with a clear and firm voice. "Have you ever asked about my life? Have you ever cared about my work, health, or happiness? Or is all you care about just money from me?" Before my father could answer, I continued, "I'm not an ATM. I'm your son, a human being with feelings and value. But you've never seen me that way." Then, there was a long silence and I ended the call. "I have nothing more to say. I'm sorry. I can't continue like this." I hung up, feeling both relieved and hurt. That was the first time I spoke directly to my parents about my true feelings, but it was also the first time I felt that the distance between us was unbridgeable. After that phone call, everything truly fell apart. For many months afterward, none of us spoke a word to each other, nor did we meet again until more than 5 months later, when I received an invitation to attend an Easter party at Aunt Aurora's house. Initially, I tried to decline politely, but after Aunt Aurora said in a heartfelt voice over the phone, "I've heard everything from your parents and Riley. I think you should attend the party. After all, we're family. We'll have to face each other eventually." After those words from my aunt, I decided to attend. The party that day started at 7 p.m. There were quite a lot of relatives present. My parents and Riley's family were also there. Due to traffic on the highway, I arrived a bit late, almost 7:30 p.m. When I walked in, many people turned to look. Some smiled in welcome, but I noticed cold stares from my parents and Riley. Just as Aunt Aurora was arranging a seat for me, with eyes full of anger, Riley stood up and said directly, "I suggest we kick him out of the party. He doesn't deserve to sit here." The room immediately fell silent. All eyes turned toward us. I stood there, still holding my coat, saying nothing. Seeing no reaction, Riley continued. Her voice rising higher, she said, "4 months now. Mitchell hasn't been helping our parents anymore. Mom and Dad now have to live in poverty because he's selfish." After that statement, Uncle Tom, my father's cousin, looked at me surprisedly. "Is that true, Mitchell?" Before I could answer, Riley continued, her voice full of bitterness. "Not only that, he hired a lawyer to sue me for money. $15,000. Money between siblings that he demanded back, while knowing full well that I'm raising 2 children." Stella and Michael sat quietly beside Adam, seeming not to understand what was happening. With accusing eyes, Riley looked straight at me. "Mitchell always pretends to be a good person, but in reality, he is extremely selfish and cruel. He doesn't care about his family and only thinks about himself. Our parents gave him everything, and he treats them this way." After those words, I decided not to hold back and needed to clarify everything right at that party. I took a deep breath, and with a calm voice, I said, "I'm sorry for disturbing everyone's party, but I think it's time the truth was revealed." Right after that, I took out my phone and handed it to Aunt Aurora, saying, "This is my banking app, and inside is what I want everyone to know." Aunt Aurora looked through the statement history in the banking app one had opened. Her eyes gradually became astonished. It showed all my transfer statements to my parents and Riley over 3 years, totaling more than $30,000. After that, I spoke loudly for everyone to hear that since graduation, I had been sending my parents $500 every month. regularly for 3 years. Additionally, I helped Riley and her family whenever they needed me, from extra educational costs for the children to the $15,000 loan that she never mentioned paying back. I also told them about when I was 18 and how I had to manage everything independently. And finally, I told them about the previous Christmas story and repeated verbatim what my father had said. "This family has given you everything, and you gave nothing back." After those words, my father shouted, "Don't make up stories." As I wondered how to respond, Adam, Riley's husband, suddenly spoke up to my father, saying, "Mitchell is right. I heard you say that day." After that statement, my father bowed his head, not daring to look me in the eye, while Riley looked at Adam as if she wanted to get rid of him. At that moment, I truly felt grateful to Adam. And then, after Adam's confirmation, Uncle Tom stood up, looking at my father with reproachful eyes, his voice loud as if scolding. He said, "Ron, how could you do this to your son? The boy has helped the family so much." After that question, my father said nothing, just sat there, looking dejected under the critical gaze of everyone. After that, I looked around again and said, "I didn't come here to ruin everyone's party. But I couldn't sit quietly while being unjustly accused. I want to leave now." As I turned to leave, Aunt Aurora grabbed my hand. "No, Mitchell, you stay. The ones who should leave are those who haven't been honest." Then she turned to my parents and Riley. "You should be ashamed of yourselves. Mitchell has given you all too much." After that statement, a heavy silence filled the room. Riley, unable to bear the pressure, quickly pulled her husband and children away. My parents left right after. The party continued in a returned cheerful atmosphere. Many relatives came to me, expressing their support and understanding. I felt like a burden had been lifted, but at the same time, I also knew that the relationship between me, my parents, and Riley would never be the same again. And nearly 3 years after that party, they officially disappeared from my life. No phone calls, no messages, not a single apology. After the incident at Aunt Aurora's house, the relatives had taken my side, possibly making them feel ashamed. I enjoyed moments of peace I had never experienced throughout those 3 years. I focused on developing my career, advancing in the company, and started a relationship with Kate, a wonderful woman I met at an architecture seminar. No more calls about money, no more feelings of guilt, no more worries about whether I had done enough. And strangely, I never missed them. Perhaps because the wounds were too deep, I replied whenever someone asked about my family. "We're no longer in touch." And they were usually tactful enough not to ask further. I thought everything was over, but surprisingly, they showed up at my apartment a week ago. An unexpected appearance. It was a weekend. I planned to take my girlfriend camping when they arrived at 8 a.m. My parents, Riley, her husband, and the 2 kids. Kate was preparing for our trip in the bedroom, and I was brewing coffee in the kitchen when the doorbell rang. After several rings, I saw them through the security camera at my apartment door. At that moment, an indescribable feeling rose within me. A mix of surprise, anger, and a bit of curiosity. 3 years had passed, and this was their first time coming to me. And I decided to open the door, not because I wanted reconciliation, but to confront them, to see what they wanted after everything. As soon as the door opened, with red eyes as if she'd been crying, my mother immediately spoke. "Mitchell," I interrupted her, not letting her finish, with a cold and distant voice. I replied, "Sorry, you've got the wrong apartment." Then I closed the door. They rang the bell a few more times, then finally left. I stood behind the door, listening to their footsteps fading away, and a strange, empty feeling enveloped me. I don't know why they came, but over the past 3 years, they had many opportunities to reconcile with me during holidays, birthdays, or simply just a weekend dinner invitation, but they didn't. And now, they suddenly appeared, and in my heart, I could no longer accept any desire for reconciliation. Even seeing them made it hard for me to breathe. 3 years is long enough for wounds to heal, for people to change, and for relationships beyond repair to become completely unfamiliar. After that day, Kate and I still went camping as planned. Surrounded by vast nature, I told her the whole story. And in that moment, I understood that sometimes, to move on with life, we must learn to let go even if it's family. Before ending this story, I want to ask you, the audience, who has journeyed with me through these memories until now. Let me know if I was wrong in making decisions from cutting off the monthly $500 support to exposing them at Aunt's party and, most recently, shutting the door when they came to see me. Please leave your perspective in the comments section below. I want to hear it. If you enjoyed this story, Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and like and share this story. Goodbye, and see you in the following stories.